The fig tree sign in Matthew 24-3, markers already in motion for the generation that will not pass. Why would Jesus answer a question about the end of the world by pointing at a tree? 4 men had climbed the Mount of Olives with him, the temple still glittering across the valley, and they wanted a sign they could mark on a calendar. He gave them a fig branch instead. "Learn a parable of the fig tree," he said. "When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh." Then he promised that a generation would not pass away. Then, 2 verses later, he said something that has stopped every calculator cold. Matthew 24, verse 32. Read it slowly, because the wording is doing something careful, and most of us blow past it in about 4 seconds. "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh." Look at the verb he picked. Ye know, not ye calculate, not ye count, not ye take 1 year, subtract it from another, and circle what falls out. Think about a man standing in front of a budding branch in the hill country outside Jerusalem. He does not reach for arithmetic. He looks, and he knows. That knowing is immediate. It is physical, and it is completely useless for naming a day. He can tell you summer is close. He cannot tell you which morning it starts. I believe that gap, the space between near and dated, is not a crack in the parable. I have come to think it is the parable. Here is the part that makes this more than a farming illustration. The fig tree was not a random plant to the men sitting on that hillside. It had a history. Hosea chapter 9 verse 10. As God speaking about the beginning of his relationship with a nation, and he reaches for this exact tree. "I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time." That is not a botany lesson. That is affection. That is God describing a people the way a man describes the first sweet fig of the season, the one you eat standing under the branch because you cannot wait to carry it home. So when Jesus says fig tree on the Mount of Olives, at least some of the men listening had Hosea in their bones. One long reading in the church has been that Jesus was invoking that history deliberately, that the tree is the nation, and that the budding is the nation coming back to life. Between you and me, that reading is popular. It is old, and it is not stupid. It is also not the only reading, and it has a real problem sitting inside the same discourse, which I am going to put in front of you honestly, rather than hide, because it is inconvenient. I would rather hand you the argument with its weak spots showing, than show you a clean version that falls apart the first time somebody pushes on it. But before the tree, there is the promise. Matthew 24, verse 34. "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass, till all these things be fulfilled." That sentence has launched more spreadsheets than any other line in the New Testament. People have built timelines on it, staked reputations on it, and set dates by it for nearly 2,000 years. And I want to say this plainly at the top, so there is no confusion about where we are going. We will not be doing that here, not because the verse is unimportant, but because of what he says immediately afterward. 2 verses later, in the same breath, on the same hillside, to the same 4 men, he closes a door. I have been sitting with the placement of that verse for a long time now, and I do not think it is an accident that it lands where it lands. He gives them a sign they can see. He gives them a promise they can hold, and then he takes the one thing they actually came for and puts it out of reach. So here is the question I want you to carry through the next hour. And I mean carry it, not answer it yet. How do you know you are not standing inside the very season he was describing, looking at leaves, reaching for a calendar he never gave you? Let me put you on that hillside, because the setting is doing work that most teaching on this passage throws away. Matthew 24 opens with the disciples pointing at the temple like tourists. Look at these buildings. And Jesus tells them not one stone will be left on another. They walk out of the city, down through the Kidron Valley, and up the western slope of the Mount of Olives, and they sit. From that bench of ground, the temple is not a memory. It is right there, across the valley, filling the whole eastern view, gold on the roofline catching the late light. They are staring, at the thing he just said would come down. And then, in verse 3, they ask, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world?" Read that again and count the questions. There are 3 of them, stacked into one breath. When will the temple fall? What is the sign of your coming? What is the sign of the end of the age? 3 different horizons, asked as if they were one horizon, by 4 men who assumed all of it arrived on the same afternoon. That assumption is baked into the question, and he never separates the strands for them. He answers the whole tangle as one discourse. I want you to hold on to that, because nearly every fight the church has had about this chapter for 2,000 years traces back to the fact that he answered a 3-part question without labeling which part he was answering, and understand why they stacked them. These were men who had grown up expecting one event, not 3. In the picture most of them carried, Messiah arrives, the enemies of God are dealt with, the age turns, and the temple stands at the center of it forever. There was no category in their heads for a Messiah who lets the temple fall and then leaves the room for a while. So when he said the stones were coming down, the only way they could file that was as the end of everything. Of course they asked it as one question. To them, it was one question. And I think this is where a lot of us go wrong before we have read a single verse of his answer. Because we open Matthew 24, assuming the chapter is a schedule. It is not a schedule. It is a reply to 4 frightened men who just watched their entire picture of the future crack down the middle, and he answers them pastorally before he answers them prophetically. The very first thing out of his mouth in verse 4 is not a date. It is a warning. Take heed that no man deceive you. Now they had context we do not have, and it was fresh. Days earlier, walking this same road into the city, he had already made a fig tree talk. Matthew 21, verse 19. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it, and found nothing thereon, but leaves only. Nothing thereon, but leaves only. Sit in that phrase. The tree had leaves. Leaves on a fig are a promise. In that country, the early fruit comes with, or even slightly ahead of, the foliage, so a leafed-out fig tree is advertising. It is telling every traveler on that road that there is something to eat. He walked over on the strength of that advertisement, and the branches were empty. He cursed it. Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And the tree withered. Now I have heard that scene preached as a story about Jesus having a bad morning, and I think that reading is thin. Days later, he sits on the mountain and reaches for the fig tree again, this time as the image of how you read a season. The same object, the same week, the same audience. One tree had leaves and no fruit, and he judged it. The other tree puts forth leaves and he says, "Now you know something is coming. I do not think you can hear the second one properly without the first one still ringing." And before he answered any of it, he wept. This is the detail I keep coming back to, and it is the one most of us skip, because it does not fit the mood we want for a prophecy video. Luke 19, verse 41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city, and wept over it. Not a tear. The word is closer to wailing. The man walking into Jerusalem to be crowned by the crowd stops on the ridge, looks at the skyline, and comes apart. And he gives the reason in verse 42 and following. Because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Let that land. Thou knewest not the time. The grief is not that judgment was coming. The grief is that the season was readable, and nobody read it. He is weeping over a city standing in front of a budding branch with its eyes closed. Most teachers open the fig tree parable cold, as a piece of prophetic machinery, a lever you pull to get a timeline out. He opened it in tears, on a ridge, over people who missed a season that was sitting right in front of their faces. Those are 2 completely different videos. I know which one the text supports. So by the time he says, "Learn a parable of the fig tree," the men on that mountain are not hearing a gardening tip. They are carrying the prophets in their ears, the way you carry a song you have known since childhood, and the fig tree is already loaded. It shows up in Hosea. It shows up in Jeremiah, in one of the strangest visions in the book. It shows up in Joel, stripped bare. 3 prophets, 3 passages, 1 recurring picture. And I want to walk you through all 3 before we touch verse 34. Because I have come to believe you cannot weigh the popular reading of this parable honestly until you have seen where the image came from. It is one reading. I think it is the most careful one available. Let me show you why, and then let me show you where it strains. Start with Hosea, because Hosea is where the picture is born. Chapter 9, verse 10. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripen the fig tree at her first time. Now hear what God is actually doing in that sentence. He is not filing a report. He is remembering. The first ripe fig, the bikura in the Hebrew, is the early fig, the one that shows up ahead of the main crop. And in that culture it was a small event. You did not sell it. You did not store it. You ate it, standing in the field, still warm, because waiting felt like a waste of something that would not come again for a year. That is the image God reaches for when he describes finding a people. Not a contract, not a census. A man in a field, delighted, eating the first fig of the season. And that tells you the metaphor was never built for arithmetic. It was built for affection. Nobody counts a first ripe fig. You taste it. I have been sitting with that for a long while, because it means the very first time Scripture puts a fig tree next to this nation. The point of the tree is tenderness, and the tree is a picture of a people God loved before they had done anything to earn it. Hold that. It matters for where we are going. Then Jeremiah takes the same tree and does something almost cruel with it. Chapter 24, verses 1 through 10. And this is one of the strangest visions in the prophets. The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. 2 baskets, sitting on the pavement in front of the sanctuary, the way you would set out an offering. 1 basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. There it is again, the first ripe. Hosea's word carried straight into Jeremiah's vision. The other basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. And then God asks him a question, which he rarely does without a reason. Jeremiah, what seest thou? And Jeremiah says what any of us would say. Figs, the good figs, very good, and the evil, very evil. And God explains, and the explanation is the part that turns your assumptions inside out. The good figs are the ones who got carried away. Like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of the Chaldeans for their good. For their good. The exiles, the ones who lost the house, the land, the temple, the whole world they knew, dragged 900 miles east into Babylon. Those are the good figs. And the bad figs, the ones so rotten you could not eat them, are the people who stayed behind in Jerusalem, thinking they had been spared. Read verse 8. So will I give Zedekiah the king of Judah, and his princes, and the residue of Jerusalem, that remain in this land. The ones sitting in the city, still in the promised land, still walking past the temple every morning, are the basket you throw out. Sit with the reversal for a second, because I think we skip it too fast. Every instinct in the room says the ones who kept their address are blessed, and the ones in chains are cursed. God says the opposite, and he says it through fruit, which means the fig tree in Jeremiah is not just standing for a nation. It is standing for a nation under judgment and under mercy at the same time, in 2 baskets, on the same pavement, on the same day. Many of us were taught this passage as a story about exile. I have come to read it as a story about how badly we misread seasons. The people in Jerusalem looked around at their unbroken skyline and concluded they were fine. They were the rotten basket. They just could not tell from where they were standing. Then Joel takes the same tree and strips it. Chapter 1, verse 7. He hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean bare, and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. Read that last line again, because it is a photograph. Made white. Joel is describing a fig tree after the locusts have been through it. And what he is telling you is that they did not just eat the leaves, they ate the bark. When the bark comes off a fig, the wood underneath is pale, almost bone-colored, and a stripped orchard on a hillside looks from a distance like a field of white sticks planted in the dirt. Now put that image next to Matthew 24. Jesus says the branch gets tender and puts forth leaves. Joel says the branches are made white and clean bare. Those are the same tree at opposite ends of its life. One is a branch swelling with sap in the spring, soft enough to bend in your hand. The other is a dead white pole standing in a dead field. And Joel is not writing about agriculture any more than Hosea was. Look at the possessive. My fig tree. God calls the tree his. The locusts in Joel chapter 1 are an army, and the stripped orchard is a nation taken apart down to the bark. So here is what I want you to see, and I want to be careful about how I say it. If a stripped fig tree, white and bare, is the prophetic picture of a nation taken apart, then a fig tree putting out tender leaves is the picture of the reverse. That is not me forcing something onto the text. That is Joel's own logic running the other direction. Many of us read the fig tree parable and hear only spring and warmth and something nice about summer. Joel is the reason the image has weight. You cannot feel what budding means until you have seen what barked means. 3 prophets, then Hosea, Jeremiah, Joel. 3 passages written across centuries by men who never met, in different crises, for different reasons, and all 3 of them reach for the same tree when they need to talk about the covenant people of God. Hosea uses it for God's first affection. Jeremiah uses it for judgment and mercy sorted into 2 baskets. Joel uses it for devastation. Not one of them is doing botany. The fig tree in the Hebrew prophets is a way of talking about a people. And by the time you get to a man sitting on the Mount of Olives saying, learn a parable of the fig tree, that vocabulary is roughly 700 years deep. This is where I have to be honest with you about the state of the teaching, because it is not a conspiracy, and I am not going to sell it to you as one. The pattern I just walked you through is not hidden. It is sitting in 3 books that anyone can open tonight. What actually happens is simpler, and I think sadder. The parable gets preached on its own, cut loose from Hosea, Jeremiah, and Joel, as a standalone timing device. And once you have cut those roots off, the tree becomes whatever the preacher needs it to be that week. The verse was always there. The gap is a teaching gap, not a suppression. And here is where I have to put the brakes on my own argument, because I would be doing to you exactly what I just complained about if I did not. Everything I have shown you establishes that the fig tree can carry the weight of a nation in prophetic language. It does not establish that Jesus meant it that way in Matthew 24. Those are 2 different claims, and a lot of confident teaching quietly slides from the first one to the second without telling you it made the jump. I have made that jump myself from a stage more than once, and I did not flag it. The pattern is real. Whether Jesus invoked it on that hillside is the argument. And there is a verse in Luke that makes that argument a lot harder than most of us admit. So let us finally put the parable itself on the table, all of it, without trimming. Matthew 24, verses 32 and 33. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. 4 things are happening in those 2 verses, and I want to take them one at a time. First, the branch is yet tender. That is a specific stage, not deadwood, not full foliage. The moment the sap moves and the wood goes soft. Second, it putteth forth leaves, the visible part. Third, ye know that summer is nigh. And fourth, so likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Now look at what he did not say. He did not say, when the branch is tender, count. He did not name a span. He did not give a number to multiply, a year to start from, or a length for a generation. He gave a category. and the category is nearness. Nigh, near, even at the doors. That is proximity language, and proximity language is deliberately imprecise. When your mother said your father was almost home, you knew to clear the table. You did not know whether you had 4 minutes or 40, and the phrase "at the doors" is worth stopping on. In the Greek, it is the picture of someone standing on the other side of a door, close enough that you would hear them if they shifted their weight. It is the most intimate nearness the language has. It is also, and this is the part that undoes the timeline crowd, completely silent about duration. A man can stand at your door for a second or an hour. The text tells you where he is. It refuses to tell you when the door opens. I believe that refusal is intentional, and I think the next hour of this study is basically an argument for that one sentence. Now here comes the honest problem, and I promised you I would not hide it. Luke tells the same scene. Luke 21, verse 29. And he spake to them a parable. Behold the fig tree, and all the trees, and all the trees. 3 words. Read them again because they cost the popular reading a great deal. If the fig tree is a code for one specific nation, then what exactly are all the trees? A code for all the other nations? Nobody teaching this passage seems to want to say that out loud, and when they do try, the reading gets slippery fast. Because now you need a symbolic identity for every tree in the illustration, and the text has not given you one. The plainer way to hear Luke is this. Jesus said, the fig tree, and then, almost as an aside, widened it, the way you would if your point had nothing to do with which species you picked. Look at a fig. Look at any of them. They all do the same thing. Leaves means summer. If that is what happened on that hillside, then the fig tree was chosen because it was the tree in front of him, or the tree everyone knew, and not because it was a cipher for a nation. I want to be careful here, because I am not telling you Luke settles it. There are careful readers who point out that Luke often broadens Matthew's material for an audience farther from Jerusalem, and that the widening is Luke's pastoral instinct rather than a correction of the meaning. That is a real answer, and I do not think it is dishonest. But I have watched a lot of teaching on this chapter simply never mention Luke 21 verse 29, and I want you to notice that. When a reading has to stay quiet about a verse in the parallel account to keep working, that is worth knowing about the reading. It does not kill it. It puts a weight on it. So let me lay out the second reading properly, and lay it out at its strongest, because a reading you have only heard described by its opponents is a reading you have never actually heard. It goes like this. Jesus was not running a code. He was pointing at a tree. Any farmer, in any century, in any country, looks at leaves and knows summer is coming. That is the entire mechanism. The parable is about the readability of seasons. Full stop. The fig was the illustration, not the subject. And the strengths of that reading are not small. It fits Luke exactly, with no strain at all. And all the trees stops being an embarrassment and becomes the punchline. It fits the immediate context, because Jesus has just spent the whole chapter listing things you would see, and the parable's job is to tell you what to do with what you see. It fits the way he taught everywhere else. His parables run on ordinary things, seed and soil and bread and coins and lost sheep, and he almost never turned the ordinary thing into a cipher that needs decoding. And it fits the verb, you know. Farmers know. That is a farmer's sentence. Its weakness is the one we spent the last stretch building. It has to treat 700 years of prophetic vocabulary as a coincidence. It asks you to believe that a Jewish teacher, sitting on the Mount of Olives, speaking to Jewish men, days after cursing a fig tree for having leaves and no fruit, reached for the fig tree with no awareness that Hosea, Jeremiah, and Joel had all used that exact image for the covenant people. Possible? Sure. But I find that a heavy thing to swallow, and I have tried to swallow it honestly. So where do I actually land, since I owe you that? I hold the Israel reading, and I hold it loosely. I think the weight of Hosea, Jeremiah, and Joel is real, and I think the fig tree in Matthew 24 is carrying more freight than a gardening tip. I also think Luke 21 verse 29 is a genuine wound in that position, and I am not going to pretend I have healed it. Where I have landed is that both readings arrive at the same instruction, which is the part almost nobody says out loud. Read the season, do not build the calendar. Whether the tree is a nation or just a tree, the command he attached to it never changes. And here is the thing that took me the longest to accept. The church has never agreed on this. Not once. Not in any century. Careful, praying, Greek reading, God-fearing people have landed in different places on this parable for as long as there has been a church to argue about it. Some of the sharpest minds in Christian history read this generation one way. Others, just as devout, just as careful, read it the opposite way. That disagreement is not a scandal, and it is not evidence that somebody is lying to you. It is evidence that the passage is genuinely hard. I want to say something about that, because it cuts against how this whole category of content usually works. When a channel tells you that the meaning is settled and obvious, and that anyone who disagrees is either asleep or hiding something, that channel is selling you certainty. And certainty sells better than Scripture does. I have been on the buying end of that. I have also, years ago, been on the selling end, and I am not proud of it. The text is not embarrassed by its own difficulty. Neither should we be. If that is the kind of handling you want, where the verse gets to keep its hard edges and the weak spots get named out loud instead of buried, then subscribe. That is the whole pitch. And if you are a watchman too, someone who has been reading this chapter for years and wrestling with it, comment the word watching and tell me which reading you hold and why. I read them. I have changed my mind from comments before, because now we have to go to the markers themselves. He named specific things, and I want to check every one of them against the actual text, including one that gets hung on this chapter constantly and does not belong to it at all. He said, "When ye shall see all these things." So the obvious question is, which things? He is not vague about it. They are listed in the same chapter, in his own words, and I want to take them in the order he gave them, rather than the order that makes for a better thumbnail. Start at verse 6. "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Stop. Read the middle sentence again, because it is the one that gets edited out of nearly every presentation of this chapter I have ever seen. "See that ye be not troubled." The first thing he does after naming wars is tell them to calm down. And then he says the end is not yet. He names the sign and immediately disarms it as a countdown. Verse 7 and 8. "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." The beginning of sorrows. The Greek word underneath sorrows is the word for birth pains, the contractions that come before a delivery. And he calls them the beginning, not the middle, not the last stretch, the beginning. Now be honest with me for a second. Which century has not had this? Wars, famine, plague, earthquakes? Name the 100-year stretch of human history where those four were absent. You cannot, and that is not a gotcha. That is the point he is making. He gave his followers a list of things that would be true of basically every generation, and then told them not to be troubled by any of it. I have come to believe that verses 6 through 8 are not the sign at all. I think they are his way of taking the most obvious candidates for a sign off the table, so nobody spends the next 2,000 years reading the newspaper as prophecy. Every generation that has done that has been wrong. Every single one. Then he does something different at verse 12, and this is the marker I find hardest to look at. "And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." Read it slowly. "Because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." There is a cause and there is an effect. The cause is lawlessness multiplying. The effect is not war. The effect is that love cools. Sit in that, because notice what he did not put on the list. Not the collapse of a government, not the price of bread, not a battle. A temperature. He says you will know something about the season by how cold people have become toward one another. And you cannot photograph that. You cannot chart it. You cannot put it on a dashboard. You cannot argue about it on a panel. Between you and me, this is the marker nobody wants to measure. And I think I know why. The other markers happen to us. This one happens in us. Wars are something you watch. A cold heart is something you have.
I do not have a graph for you here, and I would not trust one if I had it. What I have is a questions, and I am asking it for myself first, honestly, before I ask it of you. Am I colder than I was 10 years ago? Towards the people in my own house, toward the man asking for something at the light, toward the people I disagree with, which for most of us is now a full-time job. I have sat with verse 12 longer than any other line in this chapter, and it is the only marker on his list that has ever made me put the book down and walk around the room.
Then verse 14, and this is the one he attached the end to directly. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, for a witness unto all nations. And then shall the end come. And then shall the end come. That is the only place in the entire discourse where he puts a then between a condition and the end. It is the closest thing to a mechanism in the whole chapter. But look at the word he used, because everything turns on it. For a witness unto all nations. A witness, not a conversion, not a majority, not a church on every corner. The Greek is the word behind our word martyr, and its home is the courtroom. A witness is someone who stands up, says what he saw, and sits down. Whether the jury believes him is not part of the job description. So verse 14 is not a scoreboard. It is a testimony requirement, and testimony is either given or it is not. And here is where I have to hedge, and I want to hedge in front of you rather than behind you. Has that condition been met? I do not know. I genuinely do not. I have heard confident people say it was met decades ago, and I have heard equally confident people say whole peoples have still never heard, and both of them are working from numbers that require a lot of definitions to hold still. What counts as a nation? What counts as reached? What counts as a witness? Every one of those is a judgment call, not a measurement. And once your prophecy depends on 3 judgment calls stacked on top of each other, you no longer have a clock. You have an opinion wearing a clock costume, which brings me to the marker that is not in this chapter at all. You have heard it your whole life, welded onto Matthew 24 like it was born there. Knowledge shall increase. Running to and fro. It gets quoted in videos about this parable constantly, usually right after verse 14, as if Jesus said it on the Mount of Olives. He did not. It is not in Matthew 24. It is not in Mark 13. It is not in Luke 21. It is Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. And it was written roughly 600 years before anyone climbed that hill. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Daniel 12, verse 4. Not Matthew. Daniel. Now why does that matter enough for me to stop the whole video and correct it? Because the second you move that line back to Daniel, it changes what it is doing. In Matthew 24, it would be a sign of the season. One more thing on the list. In Daniel 12, it is an instruction to Daniel about his own book. Shut it up, seal it, and at the time of the end many will go through it, and understanding will grow. Some careful readers hear running to and fro as searching the scroll, not driving cars. Others hear it as travel. Both are defensible. What is not defensible is putting Daniel's words in the mouth of Jesus and building a Matthew 24 timeline on top of the transplant. And this is exactly the kind of gap I meant earlier. Nobody hid Daniel 12, verse 4. It is right there, in every Bible, in every house, on your street. It just gets moved quietly from one book to another by people repeating what they heard from someone who was repeating what they heard. I did it myself, for years. I put that verse in this chapter from a stage, more than once, because I had heard it there so often that I never went and looked. When I finally did look, I sat there feeling like a man who had been giving directions to a town he had never visited. Precision is not pedantry here. If we will move a verse 600 years and 2 books to make our case, we have already told on ourselves. Now we are at the verse. Matthew 24, verse 34. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass, till all these things be fulfilled. Verily I say unto you. He does not open sentences that way casually. It is the formula he uses when he is about to nail something down, and every man on that hillside would have heard the shift in his voice. And then, verse 35 immediately after, in the same breath, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Feel the size of that. He has just staked the survival of that sentence against the survival of the universe. Burn the sky. Roll up the ground. This holds. Whatever else is true about verse 34, he put maximum weight behind it, and any reading that treats it as a throwaway or a mistake has to explain why he fortified it with a line like that first. So before we touch the arguments, let the promise be a promise. There is a generation that does not pass. There is a set of things that get fulfilled. He said it, he underlined it, and he fenced it with the endurance of his own words. I have no interest in explaining that away. My whole concern in this section is the opposite. I want to make sure we do not do to it the thing people have done to it for 2,000 years, which is to reach for it like a lever instead of standing under it like a promise. Because here is the trouble. 3 words in that sentence carry all the freight. This generation, and the church has never agreed on what they mean. This generation means the generation that sees the signs. Whenever the budding happens, the people alive to watch it will still be alive when it finishes. Its strength is the flow of the sentence. He has just said, when you see all these things, know it is near, and then, this generation shall not pass. Read straight through. That is the natural landing. Its weakness is that it is unfalsifiable in the worst way. It cannot be tested. It cannot be wrong. And it quietly hands whoever holds it a permanent license to say the clock started in their own lifetime. Every generation reading it this way has assumed it meant them. So far, every one of them has been mistaken. That is not a small track record to wave off. This generation means the Jewish people, the race, preserved. The Greek word genia can stretch toward kindred or stock, and the reading becomes a promise of survival. This people will not be wiped out before the end. Its strength is real. It makes the verse a covenant guarantee rather than a stopwatch, and history has been brutally hard on that people while they are still here. Its weakness is that genia usually means a generation in the ordinary sense of the people alive at one time. The stretch is available in the lexicon, but it is a stretch, and I notice it tends to get reached for right when the ordinary meaning becomes inconvenient. That is worth being honest about. And I want you to hear this one fairly, even if it makes you uncomfortable. The preterist reading. This generation means exactly what it sounds like. The men sitting in front of him. Their lifetime. And its strength is significant. Because within about 40 years, one generation almost to the day, Roman legions did exactly what he said. In AD 70, the temple came down, the stones came apart, and the world those 4 men asked about ended in fire. Verse 2 came true in front of some of the people who heard verse 2. Its weakness is that verses 29 through 31, sun darkened, the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Every tribe of the earth, mourning. Do not read like anything that happened in AD 70. And the answers I have heard for that stretch the language further than I can personally follow. 3 readings. Each. One has a strength I cannot dismiss, and a weakness I cannot patch. And I have held 2 of the 3 at different points in my life, with total confidence both times. So, which reading is right? Here is what I have come to, and it is going to disappoint anyone who came for a number. I do not know, but I have stopped losing sleep over it, and the reason is verse 36. Because look at where it sits. Not in another chapter, not in another gospel, not in some scholar's footnote. 2 verses after the promise. Same hillside, Same conversation, same four men, same breath. Matthew 24, verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Read that again, and count what he takes away. Of that day and hour knoweth no man, not a scholar, not a prophet, not the man with the charts. No, not the angels of heaven. Now he has gone up a level. The beings who stand in the throne room, who have watched this from the beginning, who have no need of a telescope or a lexicon, do not have it either, but my Father only. And the earliest manuscripts of Mark 13 verse 32 carry it even further, adding neither the Son, whatever that means about the mind of Christ. And it is one of the deepest waters in the New Testament. This much is unmistakable. The one telling you about the fig tree is telling you that the date is not on the table for anybody in the room, so he gives them a sign they can see. Then he gives them a promise they can hold. And then, before they can even reach for the pen, he takes the one thing they actually climbed the mountain for and puts it somewhere none of us can go. I want you to feel the sequence, because I do not think it is an accident. And I have been sitting with the placement of that verse for a long time. If Jesus intended verse 34 to be a calculation, verse 36 is the strangest sabotage in literature. He hands you a formula and then, one breath later, says nobody can do the math. That is not a contradiction. That is a fence. He built the fence himself, and he built it out of his own mouth, right next to the thing people would want to climb over. Which means, whatever this generation means, and I have given you the three best answers I know honestly, it cannot mean anything that produces a date. Verse 36 rules that out. Not my opinion, not the church's caution. His sentence. Any reading of verse 34 that lets you name a year has to get past verse 36 to do it. And I have never once heard anyone try. They just skip it. Every timeline video you have ever seen quotes 32, quotes 34, and goes quiet at 36. That silence is the whole argument. And if you think he might have softened on that later, he did not. Go to Acts chapter 1. This is after the cross, after the tomb, after 40 days of the risen Christ teaching them in a resurrected body about the kingdom of God. If ever a group of men had earned the inside information, it is these men, on this morning. And in verse 6 they ask him one more time, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? They are still asking for the date. And his answer, in Acts 1 verse 7, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons, which the Father hath put in his own power. It is not for you to know. Not, you cannot figure it out yet. Not, you lack a key. It is not for you. It is not your department. It was never your department. But do not stop at verse 7, because verse 8 is where he tells them what is theirs. But ye shall receive power. After that the Holy Ghost is come upon you. And ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem, and in all Judea, and in Samaria, and unto the uttermost part of the earth. Read those two verses as one motion. They asked for a schedule. He gave them a job. That is the trade, and I believe it is the same trade he is offering everyone watching this. I want to tell you about the people who did not listen to verse 36, not to mock them. Most of them loved God more than I do, and some of them paid for this with everything they had. There is a pattern in church history that runs from the 1st century to last year without a single break. It goes like this. A sincere believer, usually a brilliant one, notices that the signs look unusually loud in his own lifetime. He does the work. He is careful. He is prayerful. He arrives at a window. He tells people. Some of them believe him, and some of them rearrange their entire lives around it. And then the window opens, and the morning after is just a morning. It has happened in centuries of plague, when the dying was so thick that anyone would have called it the end. It happened around the turn of the first millennium, when the number itself seemed to be shouting. It happened through the Reformation, when men who could read Greek and Hebrew better than I ever will published dates with real confidence. It happened in the 1800s, On this continent, when thousands of people sold farms, settled debts, gave away what they owned, and waited in fields for a morning that came and went like every other morning. They called it the Great Disappointment. Some of them never recovered their faith. That is not a punchline to me. That is a wound, and it kept happening. It happened in the 70s with paperbacks. It happened at the turn of the millennium. It has happened with every conjunction, every eclipse, every round number that came within reach of a calculator. I have watched it happen in my own lifetime, more than once. From men I respected. Now count the score. Every single one of them was wrong. Everyone. Not one hit. 2,000 years, thousands of attempts, some by the finest minds the church has produced. And the record is perfect. Perfectly zero. Think about what kind of batting average that is. If any other method, in any other field, had failed that completely for that long, we would have abandoned it in disgust centuries ago. And yet the next one is already being written, and people will rearrange their lives around it, and it will fail, and there will be one after that. So I am not going to give you a number. I want to be as plain as I know how to be about that, because you may have clicked on this expecting one. There is no year in this video. There is no starting point, no span, no countdown, no subtraction. I am not going to hand you a method and then wink and let you run it yourself, which is the trick I see everywhere now, where a teacher says he would never set a date and then lays every ingredient on the counter and steps back. That is date setting with extra steps and better lawyers. The failures I just walked you through are not a technique that needs refining. They are the evidence that the technique does not exist.
And I have to tell you something, because it would be dishonest to give you all that history as if I had watched it from a safe distance. I was one of them, not on the stage with a chart, but in a room alone with a legal path. There was a stretch of about 2 years where I wanted the number more than I wanted the man. That is the sentence. It took me a long time to be able to say it out loud. I had the path, the coordinates, the timeline, the whole apparatus of a serious student, and I could have told you I was doing it for love of scripture. I was not. I was doing it because a date would have let me stop trusting him. That is the part nobody say. A date is not fate. A date is a substitute for fate.
If I know the day, I do not need to be found faithful on the days in between. I can put the whole thing in a drawer and get it out when the year gets close. And the correction did not come from a book, or a debate, or somebody smarter than me winning an argument. It came from reading 2 verses further than I had ever bothered to read. Verse 36 had been sitting there the entire time, right underneath the verse I had been mining for 2 years, and I had never once let it speak. I had been reading verse 34 with a pen in my hand, and verse 36 with my eyes closed. I put the pen down. I did not have a spiritual experience. I just felt tired and a little embarrassed, and then, slowly, over months, relieved, because if the day is not mine to know, then the day is not mine to carry. So what does the parable actually ask of you? Go back to the tree, because the answer has been standing there the whole time. The farmer knows summer is near. That is real knowledge. It is not a guess, it is not a feeling, and it is not nothing. Put him in front of a budding branch, and he will tell you with complete confidence that the season has turned. Now ask him, which morning summer starts? Watch his face. He will look at you like you have asked him something that does not make sense, because you have. The question has no answer, and it has no answer not because he lacks information, but because summer is not that kind of thing. That is the whole parable. That gap between I know the season and I cannot name the day is not a gap in his knowledge. It is the shape of the knowledge. He is not a farmer with a broken calendar. He is a farmer with eyes, and that is what he is offering you. Not a date. Sight. The parable gives you sight, and sight is not a lesser gift than a schedule. It is a different kind of gift entirely, and I have come to believe it is the better one. A schedule would let you sleep until the week before. Sight makes you a person who lives awake. I keep coming back to Daniel for this, because Daniel is the man who had every reason to demand more, and did not. Daniel 12, verse 8. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? There it is, the greatest prophet of the exile, the man who had just been handed the vision, standing in the presence of an angel, and he does not understand it. He asks the exact question you and I would ask, and he asks it of someone who actually knows the answer. And the answer he gets in verse 9 is a door closing gently. And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Go thy way. Not, here is the key. Not, let me explain. Go your way, Daniel. Live your life. The words are sealed. And he went. That is the part that undoes me. He did not argue. He did not spend his last years with a legal pad. He wrote it down, sealed it, and went his way, carrying words he would never understand. For readers who would not be born for 2,000 years, and he made peace with never seeing what he had been holding. Daniel died not knowing. The man who wrote the timeline everybody quotes died not knowing, and it did not break him. There was a kind of humility in that I have not gotten anywhere near. He had a better claim on the answer than any of us, and he let it go. So let me talk to you directly for a minute, because we have been in the text a long time, and I want to come up for air. You are not listening to this by accident. I know that is the kind of line people say to flatter an audience, and I do not mean it that way. I mean something narrower, and I think more honest. You could be doing 1,000 things right now. You have chosen to spend the better part of an hour on 4 men, a tree, and a verse most people skip. That means something is awake in you. Something in you is reading the season. And I do not think that is the algorithm. The algorithm can put a video in front of 100,000 people. It cannot make one of them stay for the part where the teacher says he does not know. But I am not going to spend that on frightening you. That is the easy move here, and it is the move this entire category is built on, and I have watched it hollow people out. Fear is a fantastic way to get a comment, and a terrible way to build a life. Nobody has ever been made faithful by being made afraid. Terrified people do not last. They binge for a month, they burn out, and they end up more cynical than when they started. So I am not asking you to be afraid. I am asking you to be awake. Those are not the same thing, and they never have been. And the difference between them is the whole point of the last thing he said on that hillside, which is not a warning at all. It is a job, and he attached a blessing to it. 6 verses after, he tells them nobody knows the day. He tells them what to do about it. Matthew 24, verse 42. Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. Watch therefore. Look at that word therefore, because it is carrying the entire argument. Therefore means because of what I just said. Because no man knows the day. Because not even the angels know. Because it belongs to the Father alone. Therefore, watch. The command is not in spite of the not knowing. The command is built out of the not knowing. The not knowing is the reason watching exists. Turn that over, because it breaks the way most of us have been taught to think about this chapter. If you had the date, you would not need to watch. You would need a reminder. You would put it in the calendar, live however you wanted, and set an alarm for the week before. Watching would be pointless. It is precisely because the hour is hidden that watchfulness becomes a way of life rather than a task. He hid the day in order to give you every day, and I want to be careful about the word watch, because our culture has wrecked it. When we say watching, we picture consuming. Eyes on a screen, taking something in. That is not what the word is doing here. In Scripture, watching is what a man on a wall does through the night. He is awake at his post. He is not entertained. He is not being informed. He is on duty while everyone behind him sleeps. And he is not staring at a calendar. He is staring at the road. Ezekiel's watchman in chapter 33 is not calculating when the sword comes. He is awake for whenever it comes. So a watchman who spends the night doing arithmetic has left his post. He is looking at his hands instead of the horizon. I think about that a lot in this corner of the internet, where the word watchman gets used constantly by people whose entire practice is counting. Then he tells you what the watching looks like. And this is where the chapter finally shows its hand. Verses 45 and 46. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord when he cometh shall find so doing. Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord when he cometh shall find so doing. Find so doing. Stop on those 3 words, because that is the payoff of the entire discourse, and almost nobody preaches it. After the wars, the famines, the darkened sun, the tree, the generation, the sealed day, he lands the whole thing on a question. When he walks in, what is the servant doing? And look at what the blessed servant is not doing. He is not on the roof with a chart. He is not calculating the master's route. He is not warning the household that the master arrives on the 14th. He is handing out food, meat in due season. That is it. That is the whole job description. The man Jesus calls faithful and wise, in a chapter about the end of the world, is a man feeding people their dinner on time. I find that almost funny, and then I find it convicting. We have taken the chapter with the most explicit anti-date-setting language in the New Testament and turned it into the primary source material for date-setting. And the reward, the actual blessing he names, he attached to none of it. Not to being right, not to seeing it coming, not to having the correct timeline. He attached it to being found doing your work. So let me make this concrete, because meat in due season is a first-century phrase, and I promised I would not leave you with poetry. Readiness is a job description. That is the whole thing. It is not a mood, it is not a knowledge level, and it is not a state of alarm. The servant was ruler over the household, which means people depended on him, and the food came at the hour it was supposed to come. Somebody was hungry and he fed them, on time, every day, including all the days the master did not come, which from the servant's side was every single day of his life. That is the part I want you to sit in. Every day the master did not walk through that door was a day the servant fed them anyway. Nobody clapped. Nothing dramatic happened. He just did the work, and then he did it again the next morning, and the faithfulness was in the repetition. So what does that look like for you? It looks like whoever is depending on you getting what they need from you today. It looks like being the one people can rely on. It looks like your love not waxing cold, which if you go all the way back to verse 12, is the only marker on his whole list that he put inside a human heart instead of out in the world. That is not a small thing. He named a marker you can actually do something about. Every other sign on that list happens to you. That one happens in you. And here is what I love about this, and I mean love. It costs something.
Fitting people on time for years while nothing visibly happened is harder than any timeline. Anybody can get excited about a date. Being reliable for decades in a house where nobody noticed is a different order of thing entirely. Between you and me, that is the part that has cost me the most, and it is the only part he put a blessing on. But it also means you can start today, and this is the hope I want to leave in your hands.
Your readiness does not depend on the timeline being right. You do not need to know which reading of verse 34 is correct. You do not need the year, whether that door opens tonight or 400 years after your great-grandchildren are buried. The instruction does not change by one word. Feed the household. Stay at your post. Do not let your love go cold. That is a life you can begin in the next 10 minutes. And it is a life that works no matter which of the 3 readings turns out to be right. Now let me say one more thing about the branch, because I do not want to leave the tree without it. Paul picks up branch language in Romans 11, and he does something with it that I think speaks to a lot of people watching. Verses 17 and following. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert graft in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Different tree, same picture. Branches broken off, wild branches grafted in, one root holding all of it. And Paul's whole point, the thing he hammers in verse 18, is boast not against the branches. If you are grafted in, You are not the root. You are a guest who got adopted. Many readers hear their own story in that passage. People who were told they were outside and found out they had been grafted into something ancient. If you grew up hearing that some people are in by blood and you are in by permission, Romans 11 is worth a long night with the lights on. That is, one reading, and I hold it as a reading, not a proof. But the root is the point. Every nation, every tongue, one root. And Paul's warning to the grafted-in branches not to get arrogant about the branches that were broken. It is the same posture the whole chapter has been teaching. Stay humble. Stay awake. Do the work. Before I pray, let me say the honest thing, and I want to say it plainly rather than bury it. Scholars have weighed these texts for centuries, and they disagree on much. What I have offered you tonight is one careful reading, and every citation in it is verifiable. Go check them. Matthew 24, verses 32 through 36. Hosea 9, verse 10. Jeremiah 24. Joel 1, verse 7. Luke 21, verse 29. Daniel 12, verse 4, which is Daniel's and not Matthew's. Acts 1, verse 7. Open them yourself, with your own pastor and your own house, and see whether I have handled them fairly. I have tried to show you the weak places in my own position, because a reading that can only survive when you look away from a verse is not a reading worth having. Where I have landed is that the fig tree carries the weight of the prophets, that this generation is genuinely contested, and that verse 36 fences all of it. I hold the first two loosely. The third one I would go to the wall for, because he said it himself. And if you are still with me, I want to speak something over you before we close. I do not think you came here for a date. I think you came because something in you is reading the season. And I want you to know that instinct is not foolishness. It is the parable working exactly the way he built it. Father, thank you for a word that gives sight without giving a schedule. Thank you that the day and the hour rest with you, and that this is mercy and not withholding, because a people who knew the day would sleep until the week before it. Every nation is yours. Every tongue is yours. There is not a people on this earth outside the reach of that root. So make us the servant found doing his work, not the servant on the roof with a chart, not the servant frightened into paralysis, the one you walk in on, feeding the household, on time, doing the ordinary thing faithfully on an ordinary morning. Keep our love from going cold. Keep us steady when the calculators are loud, and when the branch is tender and the leaves come. Let us have the sense to know the season and the humility to leave the day with you. Amen. And one last thing. Straight, because it is the most important sentence in this video, and it has nothing to do with a tree. If you have never surrendered your life to Jesus Christ, none of the rest of this matters. Romans 10, verse 9. That if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. That is the whole door. Not a timeline, not a decoded parable, not a year. A confession and a belief. If today is the day for you, say it where you are sitting, and then type it in the comments so it is said out loud. I accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of my life. I read every one of those. If this was the kind of handling you have been looking for, where the verse keeps its hard edges and nobody sells you a date, subscribe. There is more coming, and it will always be done this way. And if you know someone who has been eaten alive by countdown teaching, someone who has been afraid for years, send this to them directly. One person. That is all I am asking. The branch is tender. Summer is nigh, and of that day and hour knoweth no man. He said all three, on the same hillside, in the same breath, and he never thought they were in conflict.